we can kind of get right into it. So, Christina, what are microplastics? Where do they come from? Like, what are these things that we're talking about? I mean, they seem self-explanatory, but give our listeners and viewers a little bit of a deep dive into what microplastics actually are.
Okay, so microplastics is a really broad term um, for basically any kind of plastic material that is 5 millimeters or smaller, which is really, really general and it's really, really broad because we have so many different kinds of plastics, so many different sizes, so many different shapes, so many different types of materials that they're made from, different types of plastics. I mean, even in our recycling bins, there's like, 7 different types. Well, actually, I guess it's really 6 and then 7, if it's a number 7, it's other. Um, and I see that one of our comments actually leads right into that with all of the emojis, because microplastics are found in so many different places. It's almost ubiquitous. And we'll get into that. But just to address the comment, microplastics have been found, among other places, in beer, in the air where we breathe it in. And I can't tell what that other emoji is. Are those snowflakes?
I think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that other one is, but we'll just move on from there. But yes, microplastics are in the air, in the water, in our food, in our cosmetics. So you can find them anywhere, and it's almost impossible to avoid in any meaningful degree. Where they come from, there's I would say 3 major sources of microplastics. One source, which actually worldwide is probably the most common, it's something I didn't even think about until I started researching it, is actually tire dust. And I'm like, tire dust? But it's, the tires, it's rubber and plastic is some kind of a, material that includes plastics in it. And, when it is on the road, it lays down dust, tire dust, rubber. I mean, you don't have to be driving like a maniac to lay down rubber, apparently, because it's like all over the roads, and it forms dust, and it's smaller than 5 millimeters, so it's qualifies as microplastics. And then it rains, it washes into the drains, goes into the runoff, goes into our water. Boom, you've got microplastics in the water.
Yeah, I guess I never really
And then
just
yeah,
like
I never thought of that either.
yeah.
And then another really big source of microplastics, which is something else I didn't think about either, is actually from textiles. And it's not just textile manufacturing, but it's the clothes we wear. I mean, so many of the clothes we wear have synthetic materials in them, some type of plastic or polyester or lycra or, all of those different types of synthetic materials. When we wash them, fibers shed off of the clothing into our washing machine water that then goes into the drain, and so once again, another source of microplastics that I never thought of. A third source of microplastics is probably the one thing that we hear about the most, is single-use plastics. Water bottles, plastic bags, food packaging, all of that stuff, because we hear about the sea turtles that eat the plastic bags thinking they're jellyfish and then they starve to death. And, you've got all of these different creatures in the sea that see these plastic things thinking they're food and they're not, and those single-use plastics. And not only do the sea creatures eat them, but then they do break down, but they don't fully break down. It's not compostable or anything. They just form smaller pieces, microplastics. So microplastics have been found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, at the top of which mountain was it? The Swiss Alps. They found them in the Swiss Alps. They found them in Antarctica, penguins. And so pretty much they are everywhere. Like I said, in the air, in our food, in our water. And also cosmetics. It's not necessarily a huge source, but a little while back, microbeads were a really big thing, you know, for exfoliating and stuff like that. And microbeads, they were putting it in everything. In 2015, they actually stopped that practice because, you know, you have these microbeads, they're synthetic, they're plastic, you wash it off, and our water treatment plants can't get down to that level of filtration to remove them. So they end up getting into the water. And then I'll mention one other source that's been a problem, and that's actually what sort of spurred my renewed interest in microplastics, was something called nurdles. And nurdles are these little beads, they're plastic beads that are pre-manufacturing. So it's like when you're shipping out just the raw plastic material, it's in the form of these little plastic beads. And there were some ships that were, you know, hauling these beads out in Asia, and they sunk and spilled nurdles everywhere. I mean, this is like worse than the worst oil spill that we've ever had, and it's not really hit the news. I mean, when Exxon Valdez had the oil spill, we heard it all the time. The nurdle spill is at least as disastrous on the wildlife, but we're not hearing about it as much, maybe because it's in Asia. But that's also something to think about, because those are, you know, the animals do eat them. They think they're food, they eat them, they starve to death. Bigger animals eat them, they don't get any nutrition. So it's really kind of disastrous ecologically.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of talked about how humans are exposed in like food, drinking water, textiles. But what are those health effects? Like, what do our viewers and listeners need to know about how microplastics impact humans?
Well, the interesting thing is they're still doing a lot of studies, and the studies are actually fairly current. And it's a little bit complex to try and do the studies, because it's kind of like saying I'm studying cancer, and cancer is like many different aspects. It's like, you know, so general. So looking at like when we have scientists that are studying the effects of PFAS, that's one family of chemicals. And then so they can look at PFAS effects on something. With microplastics, there's so many different types of plastics. There's a lot of different health effects that are still they're still being, you know, unearthed. Not necessarily directly think about is the fact that microplastics have, you know, both the contamination effect of the particle itself, but also the fact that it ends up being like a magnet for other chemicals that are in the water. So it can be a carrier for other contaminants that are in the water because of the nature of the plastic. Plastic is naturally hydrophobic, meaning that it avoids water. So other contaminants that are hydrophobic will find plastic and stick to it. So if a creature, an animal, or a person is ingesting microplastics, it's not just the plastic itself. It could be whatever's stuck to it. So that aspect is complex, and they're trying to figure out how to study it. But it's something that's not real clear. So let me just look at, there are some things that are linked to microplastic exposure.
I'll just say that like the three, and Christina, you can you can expand onto this, but the three major ways that humans are being impacted by microplastics would be inhalation. So
yeah,
if there are microplastics in the air as just like part of general air pollution, that's one. The second would be ingestion, and this includes drinking water as well as ingesting food that contains microplastics. So I think we'll get into this in a second. The shellfish and other animals that humans eat that contain microplastics. And then the third would be dermal exposure. And so similar to what we were talking about with the exfoliants of those small, that would be the third route. So it's really all like it's microplastics are impacting humans in various different.
Yeah. And they're looking at the health effects, and so they're implicated in a variety of health issues, but they're trying to find the direct causes. But the things they're implicated in include altering metabolism and cellular function. It could disrupt immunity and inflammatory responses, potentially a neurotoxicity, and also linked to an increased risk in cancer. So they're pretty serious potential health effects, but trying to find that direct link has been more complex than than they would have hoped.
Yeah. And so I just alluded to it, but what about wildlife and the environment? So how do microplastics impact wildlife? And I know everyone has probably, seen or heard about fish mistaking plastic for food. Is that kind of what
Mm-hmm.
we're about? Like, is that really how microplastics are impacting wildlife?
Well, that's certainly part of it. That is definitely part of it, where they're eating, they think it's food, but it's not food, it's microplastics, or it's just plastics. And so they might feel full, or they're no longer able to eat because there's no more space, but they're not getting any nutrition, so they starve to death. So that's definitely the case with a lot of the seabirds, sea turtles, some of the larger mammals and things that's happening to them. Also, you go down the food chain to the very small creatures. A lot of them are the bottom feeders and the cleaners, the shrimps and things like that. And then you have the large, so they're picking up microplastics at the bottom of the ocean. And then it's in their systems. And then the larger animals that eat the shrimp end up picking up the microplastics because it's, in them. And then so as the bigger fish eat the, smaller fish, the microplastics are just continuing. So there's also that aspect.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely, it's definitely harming the environment. And it can also include health effects of having the microplastics in their systems. The plastics are in their systems, and there's so many things we just don't know, but it's just intuitively we know it can't be good for them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just have a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first is, it feels like people have really just been talking about microplastics in the past like 5, maybe 10 years. Is at least my perception of like what the media has been covering and just what scientists have been talking about. So I guess I'm wondering, one, is this a new problem? Has it been around for a while? Or two, are we just now starting to pay attention? And is all of that informed by just consumers using more and more plastic now than we ever have? So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, how did we get here? Is this new? What, give us some insight onto that.
I don't think it's new. I think we've gotten more attention cast on it recently as the problem has become bigger. It's been something that's sort of built upon over many, many years. So, I mean, we've been using plastic for decades, literally decades. But our use of plastics in different forms have definitely increased. I mean, I've become much more conscious of my use of plastics and trying to reduce my plastic footprint, I guess you could say. And it's so difficult because it's all of my food packaging, and I'm wrapping my gifts, and I'm looking at the gift wrap. It's like, well, is this plastic gift wrap? And I'm using tape, but is the tape plastic? Most tapes are plastic unless you use washi tape or something like that. So it's almost impossible to avoid plastic. And then you think about, even clothing. It's like, okay, you've got denim, which is nice cotton denim, but people like the stretchy kind, which means it's got synthetic materials in it. Once again, it's putting in putting more fibers into the environment when it's being washed. And microfiber is the big fabric, right? Everybody, you know, you have microfiber towels, microfiber everything, microfiber, microplastics, when you wash it, gets into the environment. So there's definitely, I think we're putting out more microplastics now than before. That's part of it. We're in a very disposable minded society where, you know, the single-use plastics, you get the plastic bags at the grocery store, the water bottle, all of that stuff, you know, you don't think twice about throwing it away, and it isn't always recycled or recyclable. So I think the problem has gotten much, much worse recently, to the point where people have to pay attention. I mean, you hear about the plastic rafts that are miles wide in the ocean. So yeah, I mean, things like that didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual thing, but finally, I think people are starting to take notice. The media is talking about it, and I think that's a good thing, because everybody needs to be aware that this is an issue that all of us can, you know, we can do our part to, you know, at least make it better a little bit.
So I guess we will end this live with some action items. So this is, we like to give people actionable things that they can do when they, you know, when they stop watching the video, and they're able to actually really make an impact. So Christina, what can people do to reduce the amount of the amount of plastics that they're consuming on a daily basis, and then B, how can we avoid microplastics from getting into our bodies?
Okay, so I'm going to show you one of my favorite things that I use multiple times per day is my water bottle, my reusable water bottle. I fill this multiple times per day. It saved me. I mean, we used to buy flats and flats and flats of you know, bottled water. This plus a good water filter that is rated to remove particles, you know, smaller than 5 millimeters, which is most, you know, most filters, but our Hydroviv filters, advertisement right here, Hydroviv filters will go down to 0.2 microns. So you're going to be able to get rid of most microplastics. So this water, I can drink it with confidence, and I'm not adding to my plastic footprint because I'm refilling it with my tap water, and I'm not using any more plastic bottles. So that's the biggest one, I would say. And you don't use single-use plastics. As much as you can, use reusable plastics. Same thing with, instead of using a Ziploc bag, maybe put it in a glass food storage container. Same thing with shopping bags. Bring the shopping bags with you to the grocery store instead of using plastic. I know a lot of places are starting to not give out shopping bags. So, you know, that's becoming, you know, something people are more aware of. Another thing, we were talking about seafood, is to make sure that you clean the seafood well. Like shrimp, make sure you clean those mud veins. I mean, you know, Gordon Ramsay dressed down a chef on one of his competition shows because she forgot to clean the mud veins out. Well, it's not only unsightly and kind of gross, but you really want to clean them out, because the mud vein is going to be, and the digestive systems is going to be where you're going to see most of the microplastics in a creature's system. It's going to be in their digestive system. So you want to make sure it's cleaned out well. That being said, shellfish that are all, you know, that are not, don't have a separate digestive system, like scallops or oysters or mussels and clams, don't want to hurt those industries, but you might want to reduce or limit the amount you're eating to reduce the amount of microplastics you're taking in, because those types of shellfish are going to have more microplastics in your food because you can't clean it out.
Yeah. Yeah, those are, yeah, really, really good tips. And I want to finish with this statistic that just blew my mind
Yep.
about like how much plastic humans are eating on a weekly basis or consuming on a weekly basis. And what was it, like 5 grams of plastic?
Yeah. So this was a study that was commissioned by the World Wildlife Fund and conducted by the University of Newcastle in Australia. And this is a worldwide average. Is an average person is going to consume 5 grams or the equivalent of 1 credit card worth of plastics every week.
One credit card.
1 credit card. Yeah. Yeah. 1 credit card. I guess the good news is it's non-caloric, but but it's not good for you. Don't do it. Don't eat it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's scary. It's in the environment. We're just, we're exposed to it. They did say their caveat was there's more of it probably in parts of Asia where the pollution is worse. And there's a huge textile industry. So it might be higher in Asia. So that statistic, like I said, is a worldwide average. But that certainly was enough to scare me into reducing the amount of plastic and trying to recycle as much as I can and reuse. And yeah, just, if we all do our part, it's not going to save the world all at once, but if each of us does our part, we'll make it a little better.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Christina. This was awesome. I hope people learned a lot. And if you have any more questions about microplastics, you can DM us on Instagram. You can also send us an email at hello@hydroviv.com. And then if you go to hydroviv.com, we have this awesome little chat feature in the bottom right-hand corner. And you can speak with one of our scientists and ask any questions that you have water quality, and it will likely be Christina answering your questions. So definitely take advantage of any of those ways to contact us, and we would be happy to answer any questions. So with that being said,
Absolutely.
has a wonderful holiday, and we will see you all next week. So yeah, thanks, Christina. Bye.
You're so welcome. Bye. Have a great holiday, everyone.
Bye.